So in this tutorial, I'm going to explain to you how generics work in Java, and I'm also going to explain to you why you need generics. There are 4 different topics we are going to cover. Why do we need generics? How generics help in code reuse, bounded generic classes, and generic methods. So how I've done it is that I've actually outlined what we are going to do step by steps right here in my website. You can find the link to this site in the description box below this video. So generics is really very important topic if you want to move to senior software development, or if you want to improve in your coding or programming skills. So let's see how our code is going to look when we don't use generic. Let's say we have a class. So let me create a class that is going to accept one variable that has one property, and then it simply calls a method to print that property. So let me call this class, let me just call it generics. Okay. So I'm going to call this class, I'm going to call it integer printer. So this class is simply going to take an integer and simply print it out. So let me just write out this class. I'm not going to copy and paste. So it has a private member property, which is an integer, and say to print. So this is the item that is expected to be printed, and then we have to add a constructor. To add a constructor, you can actually right click and go to source and go to generate constructor using fields, and then you simply generate. Okay, so we have our constructor. Normally I don't like using the super. So this constructor is there. Now we need a method that just prints out what is there. So I'm going to call this is a public method, public void print, and it's going to simply print out the property, this attribute, to the console. So I'm going to say system.out print line, and you're simply going to give it what to print. Okay, so this is our class. So this class is responsible for accepting an integer, which is integer, this item here, and print it out. Okay, to use this class, we need a main method. So let's create our main class. So I'm going to just say new class. I'm going to call this class generics. And this class will contain our main method. So I'm going to simply click on this which method stub will you like to create. So I'm going to just click, I need to create the main method. Finish. So we have this class. This is our main class. Is going to print out, it's going to call this function to actually print out. It's going to call this class, use this integer printer class. So we're going to create, again, if you scroll down, you can see exactly what I'm doing. So if we are creating a printer, so I'm going to create a new integer printer, p1 is equal to, now you can give it any name, new integer printer, and we give it, for instance, 34, and this is fine. And then we are going to simply call the print method p1.print, and this is it. So if I save everything now and simply right click and run this code, you can see that it will display 34. So it calls the print method. Now if I want to print out, let's say, a double, and I change this to 0.6, you see that we have error and this code no longer compiles, and we have error exists. Okay, so now it means that this class is only meant to print integer. So if I want to have a printer, a class for printing, let's say, double or float, I'm going to just create a new class and call it, let's say, double printer. And now I can now populate this class using what I copied from here, but this time is going to be double. So I'm going to just copy this and use it in my double printer. And at this point, you can begin to see, in this case, I have double, and just change everything to to double, and what else? So this is going to be double printer. Okay, so now we have a second printer now. So if I go back to my main class, I can now create a double printer here. So I can say double printer p2 is equal to new double printer. And at this point, I can give it a double 34.6 and it's going to print it. Now, integer printer will continue to print integers. And now I'm going to call p2.print. And at this point, we expected that it's going to print out. The double printer is going to work and the integer printer is going to work as well. So I'm going to just run. And now you see that it prints out the two. Now, if we need a string printer, we also have to create another class, which is a string printer. And now you see that we cannot continue like this. We need a generic class that actually takes any type and print it out. So we have string printer, integer printer, double printer, float printer, list printer, a whole lot of things. You keep creating the printer. By the way, the code inside this printer's classes are almost the same except just the type. So we need a class that can print anything, okay? So when we create a class, we don't have to tell it what type to print. We are just going to say it will print a generic type. So when we call this class, we are now going to specify what to print. So that's where how generics can solve this problem. Now let's create a new class. I'm just going to call this class printer. So I'm going to create a new class. This time I'm going to just call it printer. And this class now, we are not calling it integer printer. Now I'm going to go back to the integer printer. I'm also going to copy everything from here and paste it inside the class. And then we are going to modify it to become a generic class. So here now, we will tell this class that is going to be printing a generic type. So like T, we are going to tell it that the type to print is T. And now, for now, this class does not know what T is. So I'm going to just call it printer and change everywhere you see the type to the T for type. Okay, so now at this point, this now is a generic type. So this class can print anything, integer, string, or whatever. So let's go prove it. First, let's delete the double printer and delete the integer printer and delete the string printer. Let's delete all of them. And let's see that this class can actually print anything we give it. So if I go back to my generic, now I'm going to only call printer and I'm going to call printer. Now, so I'm going to take care of this as well. Take out this. Now, the printer, when you call the printer, create a new printer, you need to tell it at this point when you want to use it, you want to actually tell it the type. So in that case, here we need integer. And then the second one, again, we just have to also add a angle brackets here. And here we need a double. And we add angle brackets here. Okay, so at this point, you see that I've specified the type at the runtime while the class remains the same. So if I save everything and now run my generics, let me change it so that we know that we have something different. Okay, so if I run my generics now, you can see that it prints out perfectly well, even though the class does not contain any type. Again, the same thing can happen. I can actually print a string. So I'm going to just say printer string and I'm going to call it P3. P3 is equal to new printer and I'm passing it a string. Please subscribe. So sorry I'm saying this, but I like my viewers subscribing to my channel. Okay, so at this point, if I run it, like I could call p3.print, it's also going to print out a string as well. So let's just go ahead to run it, as you can see right here. So this is basically how generics solve the problem of code duplication. So you have one single class, and then the types used inside this class, they are generic types. This is a generic type, and you can now specify the type at runtime. Now let's talk about bounded generics. Now, if you look at this generic class, you see that we have a type T, right? This type T can be anything. Now, when we talk about bounded generics, we want to say that this type can only be certain things. It can only be a set of types. It's within a bound. You are giving it a limit. And that limit could be, it could be only types derived from, all right? So what this means is, let's take, for instance, we want to create a printer that prints only objects that derive from shape. So if I go to shape, for instance, I created this class shape. Okay, this is a shape that has integer size. It can also print the size. Now, if you go to square, we have square right here, and we also have triangle as well. We have circle. Now, we want to tell this generic class that the only thing it can print is only the types that it can take is only types that derive from shape. And to do that, you simply use extends keywords, extends shape. So now it becomes a bounded generic. It means that this type can no longer be anything. It can only be either circle, square, or triangle object derived from shape. Now, how do you use a bounded generic? You have to use it the same way, but in this case, let me just make some room here. Okay, so this class takes a shape, a type shape, and then takes this to print this a shape, and then prints out that shape. All right. So that shape could either be a circle, a square, or a triangle. So I'm going to take out all this. So now I'm going to call. You also take out this. I'm going to call printer. Now printer will require us to provide a shape. Okay, so let me call it p1 is equal to new printer, and so now I want to print a circle. Okay, new printer, and I'm going to give it a circle, new circle, and new circle takes number of sides 1. Okay, so at this point, this P1 now is a circle, right? This P1, this printer takes a circle as a type parameter. So the type that is expected here has to be a circle. It can be integer, it can also be a square, it can also be a triangle. So it's bounded to the number of items, the only types derived from the generics, from the shape. So if I print now, it's going to print out the object. It's not going to print out the actual number, but it's going to print out the print. It's going to print out the object in memory, right? So because it's not a string, it's an object, so it's going to just print it out, as you can see, circle right here. But if you actually want to print out, if you want to print out the number of sides, you have to create a printer. In this case, you have there is a printer object that takes. So let's just do it. So this printer object prints out. This is printer 3. No, these are not what we are talking about. So we can actually still create that particular object. So I'm going to say circle C1 is equal to new circle and specify the number of sides 1, for instance. And in this case, we have our circle type is still intact. So if I print it out, p1.print is going to print out the number of sides. Actually, c1.print. So if I save everything and print, you can see that we have number of sides 1. So in this case, we have this type here can only be classes derived, object of classes derived from shape. So that's why it is called bounded generic, because you are creating a bound or limiting what this type can be. Now let's talk about generic methods, okay? So we want to write a method that does something, but this method is going to take, or a function, this method is going to take parameters. So let me just create this method called show. So this method is going to take data, some data, and then display it on the console. So I'm going to create a method called private method, private static void show, and it's going to take a generic type. So this, let me call it data1. So it's a generic type. We don't know what this type is, and we will never know until it is displayed or until it's called. We call this function. So we are going to say system.out.println, and system.out.println, we are going to print out data is, and then say data1. Okay, so this is, so how's error here? Yes. So now you need to specify, just after the static keyword, you need to specify the type to be generic, just like this, okay? Now we created a generic type that takes a generic argument. We don't know what type this is until we call this function, and then we are going to pass in an argument of any type. So if I call show and pass it student, for instance, and you see it's going to work because student is a string, and we say that you see data is student. Let's try to pass in something else. Let's say show, and we pass in 56, for instance. Now 56, as you know, is an integer, so I'm going to, you see data is 56. Now we want to pass in two parameters, so I'm going to give it a second parameter. Actually, you can give it as many parameters as you want, data2, and so you can actually append it here and say plus data2, sorry, it's going to be data2, and put a colon here, data2. Okay, so now in this case you need to specify here again that we also have a second parameter, and let's see, so we need a plus here, and right. All right, so we have to specify the second parameter for the 5, for instance. Now you are free to specify anything you want because now it is a generic argument you have to specify. So I'm going to save everything, and this works perfectly well. As you can see, it prints out everything. Data is student, data2 is 45. So this is about generic methods. So this is basically how generics work. You've seen how generics help you to avoid code duplication. You have only one single file, this printer, and it can print any type. We also have generic methods, and now you can also, let me just show you something. So if we go back to the printer, so you can also, you cannot extend more than one class, but you can implement interfaces. So if you want to implement an interface, you can just add it right here, implement serializable. Okay, so in this case you have serializable, so you can actually add as many interfaces as you want, multiple interfaces, but only one class can be extended, right? So this generic type in this case is a bounded generic, but it's bound by all these things you specify right here. There's a note I'd like to make you, I'd like to point out to you. I don't know. Okay, I say generics don't work with primitive types. You must use proper classes. So what this means is that if we have generic, if you have our generic here, okay, I think I already cleaned it up. Okay. Okay, so if we want to specify this type here, it has to be integer. It's not int, primitive types like int. Okay, so this is basically all you need to know about generics in Java. I'm going to maybe try to make a more comprehensive video, but for now I think this is all you need to know. I'd like to thank you for viewing. Please remember to subscribe to my channel my website. The link to this page is in the description box, and also all these code snippets, you can find it in my GitHub repository. I remain Kind on the Tech Pro, and I'm always there for you.